a brief introduction to the subject. We saw what are the essential qualities we tend to find for the beginning to take our spiritual life seriously. By and large, it's many of us, not all clearly, there are people who don't believe in religion, don't believe in God, but by and large, people tend to be religious. But being religious and taking spiritual life seriously are often two different things. Oftentimes, our religiosity seems to remain limited to visiting a place of worship once a week or once a month or on special days, maybe occasionally reading something or watching some lectures or music on YouTube or wherever. And if we do some of these things some of the time, we feel, oh, I'm a very religious person. And in general, we don't go about killing people and cheating them. So we think we're good people, we're religious people. And that's the most extent to which a lot of people live. There is one growing category of people, especially among the younger generation, who like to identify themselves as spiritual but not religious. You heard of this category, right? Maybe somebody at your home may be also thinking of themselves in that way. Now we can understand the sense in which the term spiritual but not religious is being used, partly because when we see the things that are happening in the name of religion, especially we see a lot of politics entering into these large places of worship. We see scandals and all of that stuff. And so it's easy to understand why people might get disillusioned with the whole idea of religion. And so some of the people, especially youngsters, as I said, feel that being spiritual is a relatively neutral term, that one is somehow free from all these downsides of religion by just saying I'm spiritual. The problem with that is this, that the question is, can spirituality be divorced from religion? Is it possible to be spiritual? I mean, the idea is, what is spiritual? We have used the word spiritual life, spirituality, and so much, but there is the word spirit there. So we must have some idea of what the word spirit is. Otherwise, how can I be spiritual and say I don't care for the spirit? Then what's the point of being spiritual? And most people who like to think of themselves as spiritual have not given any serious thought to what spirit is. It's some hazy something which is beyond this world, that's all. Being religious also tends to feel that we have to make certain kind of commitment, or whether it's fasting on some days or going to a place of worship, doing ritual, observing festivals. So it seems some form of commitment, and spiritual being makes it a little bit easy. You're not making any commitment. Whatever you like to do, well, that's my spirituality. And so we have to be careful when we say, I'm spiritual but not religious. Am I doing it just because I don't want to make any commitment in life? I just want to make just a feel good kind of a feeling, then that's a problem. And it's rather sad in some ways that the word religious and spiritual have gotten so drifted apart from each other. I think it's ideally, if you are religious, you are spiritual. If you are spiritual, you are religious. You cannot be one or the other. But as I said, we can try to understand why people like to think of themselves that way. But at some point in our own lives, we might see that we might be religious or spiritual in a general sort of way, just because maybe our family is very religious, or that's what our parents, we have seen them do. But spirituality will become more real in our lives when it becomes more a personal quest, something that becomes meaningful, something that I do not simply because everyone is doing it, but something that I must do. I cannot stop myself from doing it. So in general, there are these two ways, these two terms that come very often in especially when we think about religion or spirituality: knowledge and love. And that's how they are associated with these two paths of jnana or bhakti. So one of the questions, yesterday we saw how the human mind has all this, the power to think, the power to feel, the power to strive, and then these different dominating forces in our mental life make us attracted to one or the other of these four yogas. One of the questions that perhaps many of us have not asked ourselves, or like to think of ourselves in those terms, is what is more important to me in life? Knowledge or love? How do I see myself? What would be more precious to me? Would I like to know and know about the world and be known by people around me? Or would I like to love others and be loved by others? And again, there is no one right or wrong answer for this. Some of us might say, well, I value knowledge more than love. Some others might say, well, I value love more than knowledge. Some might want to say, well, both are important. Some might say, well, do we have any choice in the matter? So any number of responses are possible. We can ask a similar question when we think about God. What is more important to me? Do I like to know who God is, or do I like to love God and be loved by God? Again, there is no right or wrong answer, but whichever of these things come naturally, one might feel, I want to know about things. See, essentially, sometimes in Hindu circle, they are fond of saying dharma, artha, kama, moksha, and moksha is the goal of life, and so on. But that pretty much many people just repeat it parrot-like because that's in the books. And so it's well, moksha is the goal of life. But I don't think any book or anyone should or can define the goal for us. Essentially, we all seek what we lack. If I'm hungry, I'm going to seek after food. If I'm thirsty, I'm going to seek after something to drink. If I strongly feel the pang of ignorance in my heart, that I know so little, then I would want to know. If I feel constrained or feel a kind of bondage in some form, then I'll seek freedom. So what I seek in life, not because some book says it, not because somebody else says it, but because I feel the lack of it. And so rather than giving these simply answers from the books that moksha is the goal of life, it's better to not be conditioned by reading any of that and just ask myself, what am I really seeking? What do I really want? And to some extent, we have seen yesterday, in a generic form, we could say that we want to be happy, we don't want pain and suffering in life. But then, what is it that will make me happy? That is where differences of opinion can come. Again, when we read about dharma, artha, kama, moksha, and if somehow we are made to feel as if we need to be having a place for all of these in our life, again, that's not true. They're called purusharthas. Artha means wanting, seeking, something becoming meaningful to me. So purushartha means what people tend to seek, what tends to make life meaningful to people. That's how the word vidyarthi comes in. Vidya arthi, one who seeks knowledge. Now nowadays the word vidyarthi simply gets translated into English as student, which pretty much if you have registered for some course, going to a school or college, you're a student. But if you go to the word, Sanskrit word, vidyarthi, so when we go to college, what are we really seeking knowledge? Or we just going to college because everyone goes? We have to kind of a necessary evil in life, so to speak. Or if all the time going to college is to like get a degree, because that's what is needed in order to then start a career, then I become a degree arthi, not so much a vidyarthi. And so what we are seeking, we have to be very honest with ourselves, that whatever we do in life, what am I seeking? What do I really want? And a generic answer would be like, oh, I want to be happy. I don't want suffering. So some people might feel that what will make me happy is if I earn more wealth, if I get lots of money, lots of property, because then I'll have the means to get me the kind of things that will make me happy. And so earning of wealth and property can become a value because we believe that that is something that will make me happy. That's how artha becomes one of the purusharthas. If I believe that that is what will make me happy in life. Another way of thinking is that we see that if I get something that I truly enjoy, then that makes me happy. If I love chocolate ice cream, then I know when I'm eating chocolate ice cream, that enjoyment of that ice cream makes me happy. So then enjoyment, fulfilling of our wishes becomes a value in life. That is what kama means. So artha, kama, it's not something that the tradition says you've got to have it. That's not what they're saying. They're saying this is what people seek because in order to be happy, in order to make life meaningful. And some others might say, yes, all of those things might make us happy, etc. But what really gives me happiness that remains, that is stable, that is more deep and profound, is if I live an honest life. If I live according to dharma. And so living honestly, truthfully, unselfishly becomes a value in life because we believe living that way will make me happy. So dharma becomes one of the values, becomes one of the purusharthas. And then some others might believe that no, all of these things, while they have value in themselves, that still they limit me. That I will never be able to get out of this sense of bondage. Now, the word bondage is kind of tricky. The word freedom is tricky also. Because why will moksha become a goal worth striving for if I feel I'm already free now? And true, compared to many other parts of the world, people in some parts, definitely in North America, in Canada, US, and some of these advanced countries, people tend to be more happy, not happy, but more free, or they feel they are more free compared to some other parts. Surely, yes, there is more economic freedom, political freedom, social freedom, and so on. And so, if we feel I'm already free, then why would freedom become a goal of my life where I already feel I'm free? But if we look deeply, we might see that we are free at some level, but at some other level we are not free. That there are factors in me, there is this limiting shackles, so to speak, about anger, hatred, jealousy, selfishness. These are the ones which are kind of speed brakes on my happiness, and we are not free from them. And then there is suspicion. There's so much now all over in Europe as well as in North America and many parts of the world. There is this anti-immigrant feeling that we don't want these outsiders coming in here. Now, these are the things that we feel we are not as free as we would like to be because all these factors seem to limit me. In fact, some of you may have heard about, it's an old book, published probably, I believe, sometime in the 50s or 60s, so it's a whole very old book, by one social psychologist called Erich Fromm, and the book is titled Escape from Freedom. If you like reading, and I would strongly recommend read that book, because it has something that we often don't think about, and that is, we like the idea of freedom, we like to think that we are free, we want freedom, but the real freedom, most people don't want. And that is because freedom includes the freedom to fail. And freedom means the freedom to take responsibility. Most people want the joy of freedom without the responsibility connected with freedom. And so that book essentially does this was during the Cold War, and so it was doing the study about the psychology of the societies in totalitarian states like the Soviet Union and China, and so-called the free Western societies, which are, what is psychology of the people there? And the conclusions in that book are rather fascinating. It is this, that when people are, it's like in like China now, or in not a class of politics or anything, but I think it's just to understand the idea of freedom. So in countries where people don't have freedom, clearly they are in bondage. But there's one good thing: something goes wrong, they have always somebody to blame, because they are not taking decisions. It's the state that decides it. So what can we do? Things are so bad. Well, the government is like that. Because then you are not responsible because you're not taking any decisions. So when people are given freedom, they are terrified because then there is nobody to blame. And people don't want that. Now we might think that people in the West are free, but again, we are not as free as we think. Yes, there may not be as many rules and restrictions being imposed. There are obviously some rules. You can't drive at any speed you want. So there are some rules we all have to follow. But there's an invisible rules even in the so-called free societies. And that is what in that book they call social conformism. Conforming to what the society expects of you. Suddenly now if you go with, nowadays it's still possible, but even then, if you now color your hair, dye them green color and start walking on the street, you're not going to feel comfortable. You say, well, I'm free. Of course you're free. But everybody is going to turn and look at you as if something is wrong with you. And so people say, I don't want my friends to make fun of me. I don't want others to say. So Even though I would want to paint my hair green, I can't do it. So there are these invisible restrictions which are never codified. So we have this illusion that we are free, but we really can't dress with the way we want or do things that we want. And so the idea is, when we talk about freedom, we have to take all these subtleties in mind also. So when I ask ourselves, do I really want to be free, or what do I really want? So that's the first thing to keep in mind, that if I am a spiritual seeker, by definition, spirit is what I want. Spirit is what I'm a spiritual seeker. Of what I am seeking is the spirit. And so that's one thing. The second thing is, I spoke about knowledge and love, that what would we want? So similarly, we could ask that question about God as well. Whatever our idea about God may be, and that is, do I want to know who God is, or do I want to love God and be loved by God? And so the first one would be sometimes what we'll classify as the path of Jnana Yoga, path of seeking after knowledge of God. And the second, the art of loving God or experiencing God's love for us, that would be the path of bhakti. And so these two terms, God and love, are key terms in understanding the path of devotion. So in the next few minutes, I would like to say something about each of these two terms, about God and about love. Now, God is a very generic term. And of course, now we are speaking in English. God is the term in the English language. And hardly any scripture of any of these world religions is in English. Neither Islam, nor Christianity, nor Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, none of those original books are in English. And so clearly, when in any religious discussion, we are using the word God, we are thinking about something from within these original texts, which we are now translating into English as God. So the word God is a little bit problematic. Some years ago, there was a movie called Lost in Translation. Heard of that? So clearly, not all of us have access to the original language in which the scriptures were written. And so we mostly depend on translations. But translations are helpful, useful, but we also know that some of the nuances get lost. It's just impossible to translate from one language into another language, preserving the original tenor of the text. I mean, you can see that even in the Kathamrita. So when you read, well, from those of us who understand Bengali, you can kind of go and read the Bengali original. Otherwise, we have to depend on translation. The Gospel of Ramakrishna is one of the best translations. In fact, many people who don't know or don't read so deeply might think that that's the original book because it's so well done. That's true. But when we now try to kind of see comparatively of how the Bengali Kathamrita sounds and the English Gospel translation, although brilliant translation, some of these are inherent limitations in the process of translation itself. For instance, in the Bengali original, when we see, it's a conversation really, Ramakrishna is one of the speakers, and then there are these other characters that appear in the book. Now, the language of Ramakrishna is a very kind of a rural language, the kind of language they spoke in Kamarpukur, in the villages there. Of course, it's being noted down by Mahendranath Gupta, who lived in the city. And so it wasn't like he was transcribing the exact words of Ramakrishna, but oftentimes you are able to see some kind of a rural dialect, which is not different from a city language that Narendra and all these others used. Unfortunately, in the English translation, it all gets flattened out. Because, it's a problem is, how do we now have a rural English being spoken by Ramakrishna and then the city language? Which kind of rural English? So, a village in Texas might sound very different from a village in some other parts of the world. And so, obviously, so that kind of a subtlety gets lost in a translation. So when the early Indologists, sometime in the 18th, 19th centuries, they went to the Indian subcontinent and started translating some of the Hindu texts. And obviously they're translating into English. So how do you now translate? If you keep the original words, the English readers won't understand them. You can't invent words, so you have to kind of use the word that comes pretty close to what's already being used in English. And so then the question becomes, what is it among the Vedanta texts that these early translators use the word God for? And well, there is this Sanskrit word Deva. And the more literal translation of Deva would be the shining ones, from the Dyu Dhatu, to shine. So they're the kind of the celestial beings. And so, because the Devas tended to do or associated with kind of things that many of these early Indologists who came, many of them were Christians, and so they kind of had some similarity with the biblical God. And so they started translating Deva as God. And then the problem was, these people had many Devas. 33 million or billion according to some of this thing. And so then there are many gods. But then there is this only one God here. So then the kind of a dialectic was set between this monotheism, one God, and these many gods. And oftentimes these are God with a small g. This is a capital G. And then, of course, if it's one, then this is somehow better or superior than all the little hundreds of gods. Now, all of this problem occurred because who asked them to translate the word as God? The word God already had some pre-existing meaning. And now, it's all getting all mixed up. The problem becomes worse. And that is, okay, you can understand, people from other traditions might then be confused by this God and gods and many God, one God and all of that. But what about the people within the tradition? Now, people within the tradition, as it turned out, that historically, for 600 years they were under Mughal rule, for 350 years under British, they were a British colony. And so, the advantage, there were definitely some advantages that many people in the Indian subcontinent, if you are an educated person, then you usually know English because that's what your rulers were for more than 3.5 centuries. And so knowledge of English has been a great asset, and you can kind of now go pretty much in most parts of the world with that knowledge. And so it opened you up to a vast literature and so on. So that's the plus side. The downside to that was that even many people within the tradition did not or could not then have time or access or opportunities to go to the texts in their original language and themselves started studying these translations. And so sometimes this is called the pizza effect. You heard of the pizza effect? So normally today when we think about the pizza, in Boston they pronounce it pizza, as if there is an R in the end. So we normally think about it as an Italian dish. And yes, originally yes, there was essentially, it was bread and some cheese over it, and that was Italian pizza. Now that pizza came over to North America, and then Americans, they thought, oh, just bread and cheese. So they put lots of other things.
Toppings.
Lots of toppings over it. And it suddenly caught on. And so it went back to Italy. And then now that became an Italian dish. And now being exported all over it. So that was not the original Italian pizza. So that's why it's called the pizza effect. Now things get a bit serious. So the word idea of Deva and all these concepts in the Vedanta tradition from the original language, the Sanskrit mostly, these were translated into English by these early Europeans and North Americans who went, and clearly that translation was helpful because it opened up the treasures of these traditions to in a larger part of the world, which is good. But what was really meant to make the tradition accessible to people who didn't know the language, that translation started being studied by the people within the tradition as well. Because they didn't then want to go and take all the trouble to study Sanskrit when you have this, and they already knew English, and these English translations are available. And so then people within the tradition started studying these texts in English, the interpretation of the tradition by somebody from outside the tradition, and now it gets internalized because it is being studied by people within the tradition. And then these people now start writing more books and start giving talks. So we are kind of re-exporting the European understanding of the Vedanta tradition, but now coming from these people within the, it's like the re-exporting of the pizza. And so oftentimes we may not realize this, it's very subtle. The kind of questions we have regarding religion, regarding God, we might think that, well, like I'm a Hindu or I'm a Vedanta student, and I'm asking this question, but implicit in our questions is really our understanding of God and religion got from books which themselves are not from within the tradition. And so it's amazing sometimes you say, why did God allow this to happen? My question is, from where is this question coming? What is the notion of God that I have in my head that makes me ask a question like that? And so, unbeknownst to us, and we might think that clearly with the ease of travel and of course literature and printing and all of that, we might have these kind of national boundaries and all the visa restrictions and all of that, but no one can stop now the flow of culture and ideas across boundaries. And the idea spreading everywhere is a good thing, clearly, but there is another one book I would like to refer to. There is a book called Orientalism. It's a book published probably sometime in the early 70s. It is written by, I think, a Palestinian, Edward Said, right? And so he speaks about this, and that is that who gets to set the agenda, who gets to define? Usually it's the powerful, whether militarily, economically, politically powerful, they get to set the agenda for the less powerful. And so that's how, in some sense, the global culture has become a kind of a Western culture. Because clearly the more books are being printed here, Hollywood movies go all over the world, and people are getting influenced. What we think and how we think is influenced by what we consume. And we are consuming through in many different ways, not just through the religious books that we read, through the movies that we watch, through the television program that we see, through the fiction that we read. And so in an unconscious sort of way, and many of these things, because more of these things are being produced in the West than in other parts of the world, the implicit suppositions in these works of art are not from within the tradition. So our way of thinking has already gotten a lot more influenced by that. And that's a challenge. And that's something to be kept at the back of our mind as well. And all this I started because of the word God. That the word God rings different bells in different minds. And so, how do we start thinking about God? What would be a good way to think about God? In the Narada Bhakti Sutras, Narada defines bhakti or devotion as parama prema rupa, as intense love for God, intense love for the divine. And therefore, it's helpful to see, even though we might use the word God, what is my notion of God? One way to think about that is, first of all, asking what is my notion of myself? And clearly, we use the word I throughout the day so often. So we can ask, who is this I that I'm thinking about? Swami Vivekananda pointed out that a kind of a speculation about how religion may have even started, how these thoughts may have come to the human mind. And one way is to clearly, as I said yesterday very briefly, that we find ourselves in this world and questions might naturally come. Oh, this world that I see, how did it come? When did it start? A purely materialistic way might take us up to Big Bang and all the different theories that are there. But someone might say, well, how did it even start? Why did it start? And so on. And so the religious inquiry can begin by asking about the world. And that's how we find in different religious traditions, that's how it begins. How did the world start? How did God create it? Why was it created? And so on. And this thing we find in many of these Upanishads, etc. also. But what they also found, in addition to that, was that may not be enough to ask questions about the world. Another approach would be to ask questions about the person who is asking the question. Who is this person who is asking how the world came about? And so quickly, the inquiry turned from asking about the world around to asking about me, who is asking the questions. And so one of the things that, again, I think I briefly mentioned yesterday was how much we have changed. Clearly, physically we change all the time. Mentally also we are changing. Our thoughts, emotions, feeling keep on changing at different stages of life. But still we feel we are the same person. So something has remained unchanged within me. So in my me at present, there are these changing parts in me, the body and the mind, and there is the unchanging. And that, just for convenience, we can say that's the spirit or the Atma. So there is this unchanging and changing. Now, if it is true, and they say that this microcosm and macrocosm are built on the same plan, then it's possible to look out at the world and think in the same way. The world outside is continually changing, but just like beyond the changing part of me, there is something unchanging here. There must be something unchanging behind the constantly changing world. And so, The unchanging behind the world is, we could say, God. Whichever way you think of God, whatever way your understanding of God is, a neutral way to describe God is that unchanging reality behind this entire universe. And me, I'm the unchanging reality behind this body and mind. Now, all of these philosophies in Vedanta, they are primarily concerned with how is this unchanging here related to the unchanging of behind the universe. What is the nature of that relationship? And what they believe is that if we are able to discover what the nature of that relationship is, all of our problems will be solved. That we want to be happy, that's the only way to get eternal happiness. That's the only way our sorrow and suffering can go away forever. Right now, they kind of come and go. Joy comes and goes away. Sorrow comes and goes away. If I want the joy to come and never go away, if I want the sorrow never to come to me, I have to discover the nature of the relationship between the unchanging here with the unchanging behind the universe. Now that is what the Advaita, Dvaita, Vishishta Advaita is all about. Dvaita means that unchanging behind the universe is forever distinct and different from the unchanging here. Vishishta Advaita means that unchanging that and the unchanging here are kind of related. This one is part of that unchanging. And Advaita really means the unchanging behind the world and the unchanging here is one and the same. It's important to keep that in mind. There is no mention about the world anywhere here. The philosophies, neither Dvaita or Advaita or anything, they are not bothered about the world at all. It's about the relationship between this, they call it the Jivatma, the individualized self, as contrasted with that unchanging, often called the Paramatma. So you can see it, both the end terms are Atma, the self of the universe and the self of me. So Jiva Atma, Paramatma. How are Jivatma and Paramatma related? That's the thing. Now we might say, well, what about the world? We're not even talking about the world. And the word that they use in Sanskrit is what? Jagat. No, Jagat, that's for the word. But normally people say Jagat Mithya, the world is unreal. But actually there is a worse word they use for the world in Vedanta text, and that is, they call it Tuchya. Tuchya means, don't waste your time over it. That's essentially what it is. Yeah, I mean, the idea is, it's impossible to prove or disprove the reality or unreality of the world. No, it's not possible to do it. You can raise legitimate doubts about it, that this could be unreal, but you can't prove it. Neither can you prove that it's real. And so that which you cannot prove either way, which doesn't help us in any way, why waste your time and energy thinking about it? So they don't talk about it at all. So it's not. So again, I think I mentioned this because people think that if you're a dualist, then for you the world is real. No. You see, I mean, everybody wants to be a non-dualist nowadays. It's like the Advaita. But the kind of thinking is that, that by default we are dualist and we have to strive to be non-dualist. But actually, we are not even dualists. That's the truth. A dualist, yes, a dualist might believe that God is different from me. But the more important thing is, a dualist believes, not just believes, but if I'm truly a dualist, I will know God is, God exists. Now, unless and until I have that confidence, again, we may not have had any experience of God. And that's why the word that is used in the text is Shraddha. Shraddha, sometimes people translate the word Shraddha as faith. But faith is people kind of use the word faith so loosely, casually, that it doesn't have the force of Shraddha. Shraddha is kind of more, I'd like to translate it kind of more like it's kind of a gut feeling, so to speak. So have Shraddha in God means that somebody can say, no, not even conviction. Conviction is very intellectual. It's not even a person who has had no experience of God, a person who cannot prove God to anyone, but deep down somehow feels, hai, Bhagwan hai. No proof, no nothing, but I feel hai. That is Shraddha. Now, to be a dualist also, we need that Shraddha. Unless and until that Shraddha has not come, we are not even dualists. So don't think by default we are dualists. By default, we don't, even though we like to think of ourselves as devotees and so on, which is good, but honestly, most of us are materialists. And that is because even though we might read spiritual books and do a little bit of prayer and all of that, as we go about our day-to-day activity, we pretty much go with this thing like, ye sab sach hai, main sach hoon, all that, this is true, everything is true. And then now and then occasionally, oh, it's all Brahman, and it's all Atman. And then within 5 minutes we forget it and then everything is become real again. So we have to be humble. We have to say, yes, we would like to be spiritual, but so far we are materialists. In order to kind of rise above our materialism, we need to have some glimpse into something that is not material. And so it is that deep Shraddha, that somehow a longing to either know or to love that higher reality of God. Again, now I'm going to freely use the word God. Do you understand with all the background I've given who I'm referring to? So God, as it is used in Vedanta texts or in the Gita as well, there are many different words used to define or refer to God. One is clearly Ishvara. Ishvara comes from the Sanskrit Ish root, which means to rule. And so Ishvara really means a ruler. And so we say Parameshvara, Param Ishvara, a supreme ruler. So Parameshwar can be translated as a supreme ruler. Sometimes God is referred to as Paramatma. Atma is self, Param is supreme. So supreme self, or a supreme being. So somehow finding a way to, now sometimes we might say, that's the kind of an argument sometimes people have about, well, how we have never even seen God, so how can we love God? And so then I think it's good to then think a little bit about love itself. Because one key word was God, as I said, and we talked a little bit about God. So now let's talk a little bit about love. Now, what is love? Now, it's sometimes very difficult to define in what this word love is, but it's helpful to start asking the question, what is love? Because when people are in love, they know inside, yes, there is love, But you also like, now define what it is, it may not be so possible to do that. Now, love is what we feel inside, but love is not a feeling, because feelings come and go. Sometimes when we feel very strongly about something, sometimes we don't feel much. The feelings are kind of very unstable, they come and go. But love is a more enduring, stable thing. And so love is not simply a feeling. Because sometimes people feel, oh, I no longer feel love for somebody. What kind of love is that? It's a, I mean, think about it, how even language develops. People speak about falling in love. My question is, why falling? You know, it's like when we fall, we are hurt, we are injured. So why did they even correct like falling in love? And ideally, can we rise in love? That's something that we want. And so then what is it that we think? Something that I love and then that love disappears. So if it was not love, what was it? And the problem is, oftentimes, attachment looks very much like love. And so it may not always be possible to distinguish, well, which is love and which is attachment. Sometimes people use the two terms interchangeably, as if they are the same thing. And so it's helpful to kind of have some defining characteristics of love. And one would be that love is always produces joy. Love is something that will always bring happiness. Love is also something that gives freedom. A person in love cherish their own freedom and cherish also the freedom of the person they love. Attachment is just the opposite. Attachment, love, before we go to attachment, love also is primarily about the person who is in love, not about self. The ego is completely out of that. Swami Vivekananda sometime narrated a Sufi poem in which it goes something like this, that there was a knock at the door. A person was waiting for his beloved to come, and there was a knock at the door. And he asked, "Who is it?" And the person said, "It's me." And the door didn't open. Then once again there was a knock. Someone says, "Who is it?" "It's me." And the door didn't open. Every time the answer was, "It's me," the door didn't open. And when the answer was finally, "It's you," then the door opened. So true love is not about me, it's about the person I love. And so where love is concerned, primarily a person is thinking about the object of love, not about their own thing. And so sometimes they say about the different kinds of love. So the highest love is when a person is not thinking about themselves at all. All that they want is that the person they love should be happy. And in order to make the object of my love happy, even if I have to suffer, I'm willing to do it. That would be like the highest category of love. The second category of love is kind of more transactional. I make you happy, you make me happy. If you stop making me happy, I'll stop making you happy. And so that's kind of a shopkeeping kind of a love. And then the worst kind of love is, I don't care what happens to you, so I want to be happy, that's all. And so we'll find all these gradations in love. But primarily, love in its truest form, the I is completely absent. It's all about you. Attachment, on the other hand, is primarily about me. It's me, and then my family, my friends, my this. So focus in attachment is to appropriate and make people mine. It's all about me and mine. And love, it's all about you and yours. So they are very different things, very opposite things. And then we know the distinction between love and attachment in the effect that they produce. Now, love in its truest form will only bring freedom and joy. It's attachment, which seems to bring freedom, but attachment brings bondage. You feel a sense of obligation. You just feel bound. And then of course, that kind of creating a sense of ownership creates all the negative tendencies. There's sometimes anger, suspicion, and all of that things will occur. Now, in most human relationships, we find that both these things are present. There's true joy in loving relationships in human beings, but also sometimes some negativities do come in, which means that in most relationships are a mixture of both joy and attachment. So the joy that we get in our relationships comes from true love. And all the other negativities that sometimes crop up come through attachment. So if we can find a way, and it sounds counterintuitive, but the more we are able to eliminate attachment from our lives, the better we will be able to love. The detachment, unfortunately, again, we are using words from common English language. And so detachment sometimes feel like you're kind of cutting yourself off from other people. But primarily, attachment and detachment is concerning with one's own ego. So more attached I am to my own ego, my tendency will be able to make everything mine. It's all about me. I become the center of the universe. But detaching myself from this little I here, what Ramakrishna said, Kacha Ami and Paka Ami, the ripe I and the unripe I. So the more I'm able to separate myself from that unripe I, the better I'm able to love others. So if I want my love to grow in the heart, that detachment must occur. Now I said that sometimes people feel that, well, I haven't seen God, so how can I love God? One way to think about that, as some of you will remember, that there used to be a system called arranged marriages. Things are becoming that's kind of, I think. So it's kind of getting outdated now. And people might think that, well, if you don't even know the person, then how can you spend the rest of your life with a person who is total stranger? It makes sense to kind of know them or date people, get to know them better. We don't know how true this is. Because with all this dating and courting and all of that, still separations are not reduced anyway. So, do we really know somebody? That's the question. So I said earlier that love is not simply a feeling. Then we must say, is love knowledge? And to some extent, yes. We could say the more you love someone, you get to know the person better. But there is also a counter argument that sometimes love can create some blind spots. We might see in the other person only what we like to see, only what we want to see. In fact, there is a theory that when we love someone, we really don't even know that person, even if we have spent years and years with that person. Essentially, we have an idealized version of a kind of person I would like to love. And essentially, that idea of myself of an ideal, loving person, I project it on the other person. And really, I'm really loving my own idea of a loving person. Now, it so happens sometimes my idea of the loving person and that person itself are so much, they don't match at all. Then I don't no longer love you. And so love might give us some better knowledge, but love itself is not a knowledge. Love itself is not a feeling. Love is something more profound than that. Love sometimes could be translated as, or rather defined as, a kind of a mysterious power that brings people together, brings two entities together, and removes all separation. That's love. And so I believe Sri Ramakrishna or Swamiji, I don't remember now, who said that love leads to unity. The opposite of love is what separates people. So ultimately, love is what will bring people together. Now, at the physical plane, love gets expressed either through an appetite for food or sex. Food is really, you love food, you want to become one with that food, you want to eat it, right? That's love. And then, love at the psychological level could come through this enjoyment of music, through art, through good ideas, uplifting ideas. Because once you kind of get an idea, listen to music, it kind of enters into you. And then you become one with it. So just as it's possible for love to manifest at the physical level, at the psychological level, when it manifests at the spiritual level, then that is bhakti. So bhakti is love that is manifested at the spiritual level. And so I brought up arranged marriage because in arranged marriages, oftentimes, the people who are going to have an alliance, they don't even know each other in the beginning. But in many cases, it is seen that even when these apparent strangers are brought together, the families come together, that over time, a real love develops, a real understanding develops. So it's not true to think, oh, I don't even know who God is. God is a stranger to me. How I can love God? There is the seed of love is present in the heart of everyone. It's like you have a seed. Unless you take care of that seed, water it well, nourish it, and a beautiful plant will come out of it. So that seed of love is in the heart of everyone. So if we take care of that, we nourish it, then a beautiful love can grow. And so it is possible, even if you have a very hazy idea of what or who God may be, but if we take care, if we nourish that seed of love in our heart, it's possible for bhakti to grow in our heart. So what we have seen is some ideas about God this morning, some ideas about love, and when these two come together, that's how the path of bhakti can flourish. So now we'll have a little break for you to ask questions if you have, and then we will look a little bit more deeply into it in the subsequent times during this day. I'm not going to leave you until I bore you to death. So if you have any thoughts or ideas, feel free to ask. Yes?
The initial thought was you define the definition